Welcome to Chapter 4, Key Issue 3, Why is Access to Folk and Popular Culture Unequal? So we're going to talk about that, why some people are able to access popular culture around the world and some people are not. Same thing with folk culture, although folk culture is pretty straightforward. It's because it doesn't diffuse. But access to popular culture tends to be unequal. And we're also going to talk about how popular culture can also threaten folk culture and cause it to disappear. Okay, so there's lots of different threats to folk culture, loss of traditional values, foreign media imperialism, change of culture, environmental threats, and placelessness. Okay, placelessness, by the way, is a key term. So if you have your key terms out when we get there, you might want to write down the definition and some examples of that. Okay, so first is loss of traditional values. So a good example of this would be the role of women. So in traditional cultures, it has tended to be that women are subservient to men, right? A woman's place is in the home. Her job is to take care of the children, tend to her husband, not much of a life outside of her home and things like that, right? We've talked a little bit about that when we talked about population and how cultures like that tend to have higher birth rates, right? So as popular culture spreads to these different folk cultures, women see this and they start to ask for more. The expectation in those societies becomes like, well, women should be educated, women should have opportunities for employment and advancement, right? So I have a pretty good example for you here. So the culture in Saudi Arabia has been for a long time that women were not allowed to drive. Oftentimes women are not allowed to leave the home without a male escort. Women really are subservient to men in that culture, but just a couple of weeks ago something really exciting happened because now women in Saudi Arabia can drive. And this video is going to talk about like what that means for women and why the traditional culture, the men who rule the country, a lot of them had a hard time with this. Okay, so I'm going to shut up so you can watch this.
Segregated and secretive, Saudi women lead very different lives to men. Until now, they've been forbidden by law to drive. Last night, that changed. The country's aging King Salman issued a decree. From June next year, women can finally take to the roads. For Saudi Arabia, this is huge.
This didn't say that I'm very, very happy. I haven't slept since yesterday because of how happy I am. We have waited for years for this to happen.
This will help us depend on ourselves and not need anyone to take us. We will not need drivers anymore. Every woman will be free and independent.
The lifting of the ban will have an economic impact. An estimated 800,000 imported chauffeurs work in Saudi Arabia, costing families up to a third of their budget. In the past, some women have tried flouting the law, driving illegally to demand their rights, ending with arrest and imprisonment. One of those activists was Manal al-Sharif. She even had to leave the country.
I was targeted by a campaign that's shaming me. I lost my job, I lost my child custody, and I had to leave my country eventually. I still go and come, but I was harassed so much, especially my family, my mother and my father. And my father was sitting in a mosque listening to an imam calling me a whore for driving my car.
The long-standing opposition to Saudi women driving has come from religious clerics rather than ruling princes. They fear it will lead to a breakdown in morals and illicit affairs outside marriage. But their views have been overruled by the man on the left, the powerful Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This is all part of his Vision 2030 plan to modernize Saudi Arabia. For now, the clerics have been largely silent. The lifting of the driving ban on women appears to be irreversible. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Okay, so super exciting. Lots of changes coming to women in Saudi Arabia, which is good. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is foreign media imperialism and how that can also be a threat to folk culture. So the major media organizations of the world all come out of three countries: the United States, Britain, and Japan. All of their symbols are sort of on the right there, except for Japanese ones. Those are all British or American. But basically what happens is if you have 3 countries controlling the news of the world, you're going to get very U.S. perspectives or very British perspectives, and not a lot of other perspectives are represented. A lot of the material might be offensive or subversive to very traditional cultures. So this can also be a problem, because if all of the information has to do with the popular culture and the folk culture isn't represented, then that can be kind of wiped away. So there's also unequal access to popular culture in places like China, not because of the media that is controlled by other countries, but because Chinese media is very much controlled by the Chinese government, especially when it comes to the internet. So China has something called the Great Firewall, sort of a play on the Great Wall of China, and basically it's very difficult to get information on the internet when you're a Chinese person. Your internet use is very, very restricted. So this is going to explain it. We're not going to watch the full thing, but here we go. It has very foreboding music, by the way.
With 618 million internet users, China's population is more connected than any other society in the world. Yet for the authoritarian Chinese government, this limitless access to information poses a threat to its control of free expression. To counter people's access to alternative viewpoints, the government has developed a formidable system of censorship to restrict the content of media available for public consumption. When it first came out, China thought the internet could be a wonderful thing, but then reality set in. The internet was uncontrollable. It shifted power to the individual in unprecedented ways. So, the Communist Party's leaders began building the country's second Great Wall, a firewall of censorship. In 1998, with the internet quickly gaining popularity, the party feared the newly formed China Democracy Party, or CDP, would use the web as a tool to gather support in a way that the party elites might not be able to control. Thus, the CDP was immediately banned, and its leaders were arrested and imprisoned. That same year, construction of the Great Firewall began. Misleadingly known as the Golden Shield, a more accurate name for the firewall project would have been the Golden Curtain, because it signaled the end of the run for many websites in China. Before long, thousands of domains were blocked. Users could get through the blackout with workarounds like proxy servers and secure VPNs, but those were cumbersome and increasingly ineffective against the ever-powerful blockade enacted by the government. Today, you can't access any Google website in China, including Gmail, Drive, Maps, and this website, YouTube. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are unreachable, as is Bing and most of Yahoo. China's 4 million bloggers have to use sites other than Blogspot and WordPress, the 2 most popular quick-writing platforms in the rest of the world. China employs an army-sized force to not only block web content, but also to constantly monitor user activity. There are more than 2 million Chinese internet police officers. If you speak out or try to defy the Great Firewall, you disappear. Amnesty International says China, quote, has the largest recorded number of imprisoned journalists and cyber dissidents in the world. One of the first examples of this came in 2004, when Chinese journalist Shi Tao used his Yahoo email account to send the government's latest list of banned topics to a pro-democracy website in New York. China's response was swift. It asked Yahoo for the name behind the email account, the exact contents of the message, and the exact location where the account was accessed. Yahoo complied, and Tao was immediately arrested, charged with leaking state secrets, and, after a 2-hour show trial, sentenced to 10 years in prison. Sending such a strong message to its citizens that the government has complete control over the internet comes at a high price. The younger generations in China think the Communist Party's excessive control is harmful and insulting. Academics can't gain access to scientific journals, business people can't communicate with colleagues around the world, and China's leaders, with their long history of corruption, can't be investigated. Part of the reason why the government has gotten away with all this is because of the country's feverish pace of economic and social progress. Since 1978, the average income in China has gone from $200 a year to $6,000. This 3,000% increase has given the Communist Party a huge reservoir of goodwill. But instead of using this success as a foundation to cultivate a more progressive relationship with its people, the government is continuing to tighten its chokehold on freedom of expression. In 2011, China's leaders saw how powerful a tool social media was to people who sought to challenge or even overthrow authoritarian governments in the Middle East. And last year, China even experienced this firsthand when over 100,000 protesters took to the streets in Hong Kong to directly...
Okay, so that explains it pretty well. So information is really hard to come by. Teddy! Sorry. Shh, you guys, go play somewhere else. Okay, it's really hard to access information that's negative about China within China, and we don't get a ton of negative information about China as well because they're pretty good at keeping what's going on in the country under wraps. Shh. Gosh. Okay. Also, culture tends to change, and that can be a threat to folk culture as well, since folk culture is kind of expected to remain traditional and static. Teddy! Theodore! So part of this happens because of relocation diffusion, right? Different people moving into different locations, and they tend to bring their own culture with them. Hey, guys! Sorry. Assimilation and acculturation, those are both key terms as well. Acculturation is when a culture completely adheres to a more dominant culture, and because of it, they lose their own culture. Sorry, that's assimilation. Acculturation is when a culture adopts some aspects of a new culture while maintaining some of their own. A good example of that would be African slaves that were brought over during the slave trade. They kind of combined a lot of their African traditions, but then also adopted new American traditions, such as they became Christians and joined the Baptist church and things like that, but they still had a lot of their own holidays and traditions and things like that. Okay? Assimilation has more to do with completely replacing a culture with whatever culture is most likely in power or whatever the majority culture is. Teddy, knock it off. Okay, I'm going to hold him so he stops talking. Okay, so a good example of this would be Native Americans. We looked at the assimilation schools, I think, in the last lecture, so that would be a good example. I'm sorry, this is so disjointed. My doggies are so naughty. Okay, and now my screen has frozen. Okay, the environment also leads to a loss of folk culture. The best example I can give about this is a golf course, right? In order to build a golf course, you really have to modify the natural environment. It means a lot of water resources are used for golf courses to keep the greens green, right? A lot of trees and things like that usually have to be removed. So that can lead to a loss of folk culture if that land was particularly important to a more traditional group. Okay? So the last thing is placelessness. Popular culture is uniform, right? It doesn't typically vary that much from place to place. But folk culture is very specific to itself. Like a lot of the examples you looked at in class the other day, those are not things that typically happen anywhere else in the world. Okay? So art, architecture, food, beliefs, all of that's popular culture, but it all kind of looks the same no matter where you go. Okay? So when you go to a place, and it looks exactly like any other place you've been. We've looked at the similarities between Times Square and Tokyo in Japan, how it's very much just lots of advertisements all over the place and bright lights and things like that. That's kind of a good example of placelessness, right? There's American companies like McDonald's, right, all over the world, and when that happens, like if you have a bunch of McDonald's in Mumbai, India, it starts to look more like America, right? It starts to lose its uniqueness, its characteristics that make it specifically Mumbai. Okay, and I believe that is it, which is good because we need to go because my dog won't be quiet. All right, so hopefully you were able to understand me over the yelling dog. We will have one for the next section, chapter 4, Kyushu 4 already. So stay tuned, and as always, expect a pop quiz tomorrow.